Okay, Lane, I've got your work up. Thank you so much for your submission. Okay, now I know that you were a little bit behind before, and I know you're trying to catch up, but there's a couple of things I want to address in your presentation here. So, first thing I think that is the most important thing is the consistency of the logo itself. Let me describe what I mean. Take a look at the logo here. You got the igloo, and I think the igloo is a good idea. There are actually igloos in Sweden, and as a matter of fact, you can rent. I mean, you can build your own igloo in Sweden. And it's like an adventure. And then there's also prefabbed igloos. There's actually hotels or Airbnb that you can stay in igloos. It's actually quite fascinating. So I think this is a pretty good concept here in terms of representing Sweden with the opportunity of the igloo. So we take a look at this logo right here. Now, I think, honestly, I think that we have the Olympic colors making up the igloo, but I'm wondering how it might look if you were to take the black and use it for the doorway, and then use the yellow for the other assorted, these two black areas, where you have, just swap out the yellow for the black. See, I think that might be a little bit more interesting because the doorway would indicate that it's an entry path. And I think it would make a lot of sense if that were presented in a darker color, because right now, using it to represent the sides of the structure itself, I think the color is too heavy and too bold. And basically, when we back off this, we really start seeing only the black, and the other colors don't really stand up to the black. So I think the black is a little bit too, it's demanding a little too much hierarchy in the logo itself. I would recommend that. Now, in terms of consistency, if we take a look at the size of the stroke weights right here, here, and around the door, and then in these other areas, and then we come down here, and look how thick they are here. It's a completely different structure. Look how thin they are here. Look how thick they are here. So that's a little bit, that's an inconsistency that would have to be addressed. As far as the logo itself goes, there's one real major issue with the logo, and that's the logo can't stand on its own as is, the way that you've got it presented. Let me show you what I mean. Typically, you've got the construction of an Olympic logo would be something like this. You've got the mark, that would be your igloo, okay? Then you would have the name of the location, Kiruna, Sweden. Then you would have the Olympic rings, small underneath. So again, you'd have the mark, the name of the location, and then the rings. And those circles, those rectangles I drew are basically kind of the representation of the size and scale you want each to be. Now, the Olympic rings don't have to be near as big as the logo itself. And then here's a third presentation of your logo with these giant rings underneath. So the first thing I would recommend is getting yourself a consistent presentation of the logo so that you can present it throughout your presentation. You can present it consistently throughout your presentation. Okay, pattern designs, ad banners, you start to get into this kind of fifth element, these kind of patterns that you're going to use, but I don't see them anywhere else. So that's something where you would want to incorporate the fifth element into your branding packages in order to kind of reinforce this visual language that you're establishing and create a sort of support graphics system so that you don't have to just place your logo on a bunch of different things. And that's what we want to avoid. And that's what I think I'm seeing here is that we've got the logo placed on a sign, we got the logo placed on a ticket, then we've got the logo placed on a poster. So instead of that, I think that a really good idea is to go through, and I'm going to use Brian's example. Brian is doing some really interesting work, and he's probably very mad at me at this point for using his example over and over. But it really is interesting work, and he's been working extremely hard. Let me just show you some ideas here. So you've got this pattern, these patterns that he's developing, and you've got your patterns that you've developed, but you haven't really shown where your patterns come from. Okay, here's your patterns, but what is the impetus? What is the origin? What is the inspiration of these patterns? I note that they're almost the same shapes as the igloo. So, I mean, are these to represent parts and pieces of the igloo? We need to know that. And over here in Brian's, he shows the actual representation of the pattern studies as they were applied to some of the location floral folk art indigenous to the location he's chosen. So there is concept behind the patterns that he's chosen. So he takes these patterns a step further and starts to develop these kind of patterned elements that can be used in conjunction with the logo, so that we're not just placing the logo over and over. This would be known again as the fifth element, where it's a supporting series of graphics that allow the viewer to create a connection, or create a connection from the viewer to the presentation to the branding of the event, in order to create these personal ties. So, and then we can see how he's used those patterns and the backgrounds in different areas in the ice rink. And that's really what we're after. We're not after, see, the patterns, and we got the logo, sure, but we've got the patterns. There's the logo front and center, but we got these wonderful background patterns that are creating this fifth element. And I think that's one thing that we're missing from your presentation, is we don't have this incorporation of fifth element patterns, symbols, and signs in order to develop a connection between the spectator and the event itself. All we really have is placement of the logo. So I would work towards that. Also, try to think about really placement here, and we really want to start getting a lot of different things in place here. Remember, consistency of the logo. It's got to be consistent, presented throughout. You can also develop some other variations of the logo. For example, you've got your logo. When I was saying before, you'd have your mark, then you'd have your type, Corona, Sweden, and then you'd have the rings. You could also develop it where you have your mark, and then you have Corona, Sweden, so that you can use it in a horizontal application. For example, on like the ice rink, the sides of the ice rink. So you definitely want to think about that. Another thing I want to mention is I have not seen your pictograms at all. So that's something that's really, really, here's some drawings of your pictograms, but we need to get those into digital format very quickly. And again, so you've got your poster where you can probably really concentrate on creating this connection between fifth element and the viewer. Okay, so again, in summary, the one thing I really think we need to avoid is just placing the logo on different collateral materials. In a concept-driven class like this, it's more about concept development, methodology, and communication with the intended audience. More so about that than it is about just logo placement. And I know it's really easy to place your logo on things, and it's really, we tend to do that as young designers, student designers, because quite often that's what a lot of classes require, and that's what a lot of classes request. So in this situation, we're asking you to take a little bit of a further direction in creating this solid visual concept with a supporting set of graphics aside, above and beyond the logo itself. Okay. Now, one thing I want to draw your attention to, is where you can get some really good inspiration, is in the announcements area. And I'll just bring you right over here to the announcements area. And I want to show you a couple of things that I've placed in the announcements area. Right over here, we have, it's the latest announcement. And I've got for your inspiration. And I've got 4 different presentations that really show some wonderful use of patterns, of the creation of symbols in order to communicate with a worldwide audiences, where there is a language barrier, and maybe the attempt to transcend these cultural and language barriers that are presented in an international audience, such as one that we would find in an Olympic event. So again, in summary, it's just really, really important that you start developing a fifth element and not depend so much on placement of logo, but really develop a supporting system of graphics that will allow you to create sign and symbol in order to transcend the communication barriers between a multicultural audience. Okay? All right, Elaine, if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Thank you very much.